Welcome back to the Beyond the Hyphen podcast. I'm Mark Lee, your host. Today I'm joined by Cory McCray, who represents Maryland's 45th Legislative District in Northeast Baltimore City in the Maryland State Senate. Senator McCray previously served in the Maryland House of Delegates before being elected to the state Senate, and he currently serves on the Senate's Budget and Taxation Committee. Before entering public service, Cory McCray came through an apprenticeship with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and worked as a journeyman electrician, an experience that has shaped his focus on issues including workforce pathways, economic opportunity, and investment in Baltimore communities. In this conversation, we'll highlight discussions around the policy challenges and opportunities facing Baltimore City, the role of state government in addressing issues across the state of Maryland, and how leaders like Senator McCray are thinking about issues from economic mobility, transportation, to community investment. We'll also hone in a little bit on youth civic participation, what it means for younger generations to engage meaningfully in public life, especially from marginalized communities, and how local leadership, specifically from Baltimore, is actively shaping the future of Maryland. Senator McCray, thank you so much for joining us.
Mark, first, I just want to lean in and say thank you. I'm humbled, honored to be able to join Beyond the Hyphen podcast.
Of course. Senator, many will say that your journey was an extremely unlikely journey. And after I initially read about you, I thought your journey was so spectacular in that, there was a turn in your life, similar to that of, Governor Wes Moore, who I've also been familiar with. And he had, handcuffs on his hands at a very, very young age. And I thought that, you speaking of spending time at the Cheltenham Detention Center at the age of 13, and then later entering an electrical apprenticeship, that you've talked about changing the trajectory of your life. When you look back on that period now, what part of that opportunity, that apprenticeship and mentorship shifted for you in terms of direction and mindset?
Well, just to lay it out for the listeners, first, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate that, everybody, 188 members in the General Assembly have a different lived experience. And I can definitely say that I have a different lived one. I think about my challenges in the K through 12 system, being removed from a number of schools throughout Baltimore City's public school system. I think about my challenges in the Department of Juvenile Services, DJS is the acronym. And I think about, like you said, I got 4 children. I got a Kennedy, Reagan, CJ, and Bryson. And Mark, there's not one day that I can imagine that they're not under my roof. But unfortunately, my mom had to see it where her son did not have him in her home at the age of 13 because of poor choices. I tell my young people that you are the 5 people that you keep the most company of. Not having the mental capacity, not having the understanding of being able to say to a friend that wanted me to make a poor choice, I don't want to do that today. I don't want to steal a gun. And what happens is when that did take place, Mark, I found myself in Boys Village, Cheltenham, out there in Prince George's, never leaving Baltimore, but my first time leaving Baltimore is right there in a juvenile facility. Unfortunately, this will happen to me every year in my teenage life. This will happen to me again at 14, 15, and 17. And then I also recognize to them and just let them know, not only was I wrapped up with challenges in K through 12, DJS, but also in our adult system. I turned 18 over to Baltimore City Jail. And I remember that experience, Mark, where my mom would come to visit me. And imagine a son saying to her mother that you should give up on me. I don't see a path forward. And then she responds back with words that still shake me to this day, Mark. She would say to me, Cory, I'm going to keep believing in you until you believe in yourself. When you asked the question about the apprenticeship, it was my mom that actually found the apprenticeship program. She reached out to the Maryland Department of Labor, said, send me every apprenticeship program, handed me the packet that they had given her, and said, Cory, I need you to fill out applications. And as you stated, it had shifted my trajectory because not only was I able to garner mentorship, but new disciplines, but also a skill that no one will ever take away from me because I spent 5 years learning how to be an electrician.
Yeah. No, that's special. I think especially now when there's so many different career opportunities for young people, apprenticeships and this year's service year option that's been debuted by the Moore Miller administration, they often get overlooked. but they are, to be true, more accessible for a large proportion of our youth, particularly in places like Baltimore City, such a great city. And so when you think about young people coming up in Maryland, coming up in Baltimore today,
Mm-hmm.
and now you having led a career in public policy,
Mm-hmm.
where do you sort of see those kinds of apprenticeship earn while you learn opportunities are in the minds of policymakers? Do your colleagues, prioritize them? Do your colleagues um, like how can we even look at apprenticeships and things like the service year option growing in Maryland?
Yep. So one of the things that I think about, Mark, when you asked, and this crosses party lines, this crosses age, when you ask someone apprenticeships, everybody usually have a positive response to it. But if you ask them to articulate three things that you know about an apprenticeship, that's where folks kind of lose sight of. So people may not know about these earn while you learn opportunities. People may not know where they house that in the Department of Labor, no matter what state or with the federal government. People may not know where are they even located from that standpoint. They may not know that they are growing. You think about apprenticeships, you think about healthcare now, you think about tech, you think about videography, you think about so many different industries. So I do think that, and I say this a lot, you don't know what you don't know. So that's the first challenge. But then I think that we went through this phase in the country where it was college or bust. So people determined success whether you were going to a community college or a four-year university, and everything else was seen as below or second standard. And in my opinion, I believe that apprenticeship is the other university. This is the equivalent. So if a person chooses to be a carpenter, chooses to be an electrician, chooses to be a plumber or steam fitter, they're not underneath of someone that's went to one of our prestigious four-year universities. At the end of the day, they just chose a different route.
Right.
I was sitting on the stage next to one of my friends, the former ambassador of Switzerland, Susie Levine, and she said, Cory, do you know that even at its highest in this country, only 39% will go and graduate from high school and go to a community college or university. Mark, I challenge what Susie's saying is, why are we trying to fit the majority? Majority aren't going to go. Majority at its peak was not there. Why are we trying to fit circles and square holes? And we need to make sure that we have options for everyone and making sure that young people can decide this for themselves. If I can, I like to lean in on the example of some low-hanging fruit. I think about 7 years ago, Mark, when I asked the question of my school system, I said, hey, we do university tours and we do community college tours all the time. Why aren't we doing apprenticeship tours? And then I found a partner in College Bound. College Bound said, we would love to do something like that. Can you connect us with the apprenticeships? I said, sign me up. For the last 7 years, we've been taking Dunbar, we've been taking NAV, City Neighbors, Reach Partnership, and it's expanded over this period of time where now Mervo, Carver, Emerson are also joining in, where we get on the bus 2 times a year and we do apprenticeship tours. We take them to the carpenters. We take them to the plumbers and steam fitters. We take them to the operating engineers. We take them to the electricians so that our young people can just have that experience of knowing, and then they are the ones making a choice. Mark, I know you're sharp, so you may understand the importance of relationship capital. One of the things is that imagine how nervous it is for adults to walk into a building that they've never been in for the first time. It's heightened 10 times for our young people, and we need to make sure that they feel comfortable in these spaces and that they own them. The relationship capital comes in because they're now meeting the training directors, the assistant training directors of these respective programs, and then they can actually email them and feel some level of comfortability of the leadership in these respective industries.
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned like you mentioned, getting more people, more organizations to join in on that effort. And I absolutely think that many, if not the majority of our youth now currently, right, need this opportunity more than ever. They need to be met where they are. A lot of my friends, right, I'm currently in high school. A lot of my friends feel as if though their hardships and their situations aren't changeable, particularly in areas where there are histories of violence or systemic poverty. And I think that, again, a large part of whether those youth beliefs is the truth of not being able to change hinges on opportunities like you mentioned apprenticeships, right, that play a major role in so many of our elected leaders' lives and public policy leaders' lives. And so when you think about young people, Senator McCray, I'm curious, like, when you see young people, do you ever see yourselves? Do you ever see yourself in the young people of Baltimore? You know, at what point did you think that running for political office was in the cards for you, and whether
Mm.
that would be something that you wanted to experience and to lead in your life?
Man, you hit a couple different areas as I was processing and thinking of the question. So it's multiple things. I'm gonna quickly go over three of them.
Sure.
So one of the things that you said was, do I ever see myself in the young people that I'm interacting with, engaging with? I see it all the time. I see so much hope. I see so much potential, and I see their greatness. And I think it's important and incumbent upon me to not only speak life, but just let them know that they are great. Mark, I say that in saying that I wrote this book that I spent 3 years working on. It's called The Apprenticeship That Saved My Life, because I wanted to hand out a tool to our young people, no matter if you're 16, 18, 20, trying to figure out the same puzzles that my mom was figuring out, that I was figuring out. How do you get there faster? How do you get there stronger? But you also have that level of information.
Mhm.
Second thing, why should we as adults stay very close proximity to our young people? I stay in my high schools, in my K through 12 institutions, my college universities, at least once or twice a week, you'll find me at a school. And what happens is I know that I'm in a place of privilege at this moment. And the people that are closest to the problems are right there with our young people. So when I'm engaging with them, Mark, a lot of times I'll ask them the question, if you were a senator for one day, what's one thing you would change about your school? I walked into Achievement Academy 2 years ago, Mark, and one of the young men had stood up and said that I would have driver's ed in my high school. And I stood outside that high school Achievement Academy for a couple minutes and I just processed. I processed, what did it take for me to even enter into the apprenticeship? I had to be 18 years of age. I had to have a high school diploma or GED, 1 year of algebra, but I also had to have a driver's license. And then I thought about, how are we setting these 11th and 12th graders up for success if we're not even giving them as adults the minimum requirement, the floor to even be able to fill out the application? We took those same young people to Annapolis, Mark, and we took them in front of the EEE Committee, Environment, Energy, and Education. They then testified before the ECM Committee, Economic Matters. They watched the governor sign their bill, where driver's ed is now available in the state of Maryland as a pilot program with $2 million appropriation in perpetuity. So it's there until someone takes it out, to make sure that schools with a concentration of poverty level of at least 40% can engage and have a mechanism for them to create this opportunity for young people. To the last point that you made, the third point that you made, when did I even think or process or even imagine that I could be in political office? Mark, I want to acknowledge that I had never stepped 1 foot on the House of Delegates floor, 1 foot on the Maryland State Senate floor prior to being elected. The only tools that I had was I had a will to serve my people. My heart was in the right place, and I knew that I had a work ethic from that standpoint. And what happens is that I watched so many people try to cut through, but was unsuccessful because maybe they couldn't organize people. Maybe they couldn't organize money. And I think that if our leaders fail to step up to the plate, then everyone else will. And I think that it's incumbent, if you do see yourself in that position, to step up, to engage, not to throw rocks at the wall, but to engage in the process. Mark, when I ran for the House of Delegates back in 2014, we organized a couple hundred young people. And when I knocked on those doors, the moms, the dads, they saw me and they saw their son. They saw their daughter. The granddads, they saw me and they saw their grandsons, their granddaughters. And what happens is, though we didn't come, when you come in, it's 3 House of Delegate members. So no matter whether you come in first place, second place, or third place, they still call you a member of the House of Delegates. I came in third place 2014 outside of the ticket. And then decided in 2018 that the power was over there in the Maryland State Senate, and that I will run against the second highest state senator in the state of Maryland, which we call the position of President Pro Tem. Mark, I did not know how hard this would be. And it was hard because mentally I had never had so many people tell me to wait my turn. I never had so many people tell me that maybe this isn't the right time. Why don't you wait a little bit? You'll get there. And I started to even challenge myself whether I could even pull this off or whether I could even do it. But it wasn't even close, Mark. We won by 17 points. It wasn't a close election. And we've been rocking and rolling ever since we've been in that Maryland General Assembly. We've passed over 100 bills during my tenure. We've done big things like voting rights, minimum wage, keeping libraries open, public transportation, maternal health, a number of different things, and a number of tangible things that you can be able to see as we have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Senator McCray. Um, so I think seeing a lot of all of the work that you're doing in Annapolis today sort of transitions us from your story to the active initiatives that is taking place in Baltimore. Baltimore sits at the intersection of a lot of statewide conversations around economic mobility, around public safety, housing, and infrastructure. When you're working on policy in Annapolis, and I know legislative session is going on right now, but how do you think about balancing solutions that address Baltimore City specifically, while also making the case that investing in the city benefits the entire state?
Yep. So I try my best to enter my heart to think about those neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested in. So these are folks that have not been sitting at the table for not just years, but decades. And then I also try my best to think about, like, what's the best use of my time? How can we spend our time making the best investments on the greatest gifts that we've been given in this world, which I believe are our young people. So I'm a big fan of education and getting it right. I talked to you about driver's ed, but I've also been a staunch supporter of the blueprint for Maryland's future. I also think about what does recreation activities look like, whether it's girls flag football, chess, music, arts, things of that nature, to make sure that we're thinking about the whole child versus some components, because the mind works in great ways from that standpoint. But mine's is thinking about more or less the young people, the seniors that cannot take care of themselves, and us understanding our full responsibility, making sure that they're sitting at the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think, I'm always thinking, because I've, I have a lot of folks that I know who are in Baltimore who have benefited significantly from policy that has been made with their lived experiences at heart. And I think hearing you talk about the balance between local challenges, and of course statewide priorities, like you mentioned, the blueprint that Governor Westmore really, I think, honed in on and is continuing to try to build after maybe its initial failures or unpredictabilities. I think a lot of the policy outcomes in these few months don't just depend on what happens in Annapolis, though, right? But it depends on how state leaders interact with leadership on the ground. And I think I know where I'm going with this, but Baltimore obviously has its own leadership under Mayor Scott, while you and your colleagues represent the city at the state level. And so for our youth audience, who a lot don't have access to how this inner working between city and state level leadership works, or how this relationship building works, can you tell our young audience what that sort of looks like in practice within the community and how that affects your decision making?
Yep. So one of the things that I think about is, especially in the city of Baltimore, is that you have a leader. So when you think about Lamar Jackson, I think of Lamar Jackson as the leader for the Ravens. So when we think about that, Brandon Scott is the quarterback. And what I find myself as, either I'm a tight end, I'm a wide receiver, I'm a running back, whatever you foresee, but I'm very clear on who my quarterback is. And the question is like, once the plays are called, how can you work in coordination with the respective leader of that respective jurisdiction, which is Brandon Scott? So I think through that, and I overlap 5 councilmatic districts, and I try my best. I talked to the mayor just this morning about an issue or project that we were having, but I try my best to work in coordination with not just my mayor, but also my 5 council members, the Danielle McCrays, the Tony Glovers, the Ron Dorseys, Jermaine Jones, Odette Ramos. Like, I try my best to work in coordination with them. And also my members in the House of Delegates is another chamber on the state level. So we'll bring all these folks together. We usually get together at least once a month for East Baltimore, Northeast Baltimore, to understand what some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, and things that we need to be working on. Some of the great work, if I can tell you about some of the tangibles that maybe people will be able to understand. Green Mountain Chase. We just opened up the first library at that intersection in the last 15, 20 plus years. First public library in Baltimore City, right there at Green Mountain Chase. Mark, Furley Elementary was a emergency evacuation. These young people had to move out of their school building because the school was sinking. We were able to, and that was 10 years ago. This is the first year that they get to go back into an elementary school that we spent $30+ million on, in an elementary school that they deserve. It has a dance studio, a science space, a full-size regulation gym that you don't even see in some high schools, right there in the elementary school. We're having the first public school football stadium, the Robert L. Dalton Football Stadium at Hartford and 25th. 400 block of East Biddle Street, we have teacher housing where neighborhoods are choosing what they want in their neighborhood versus government telling them what's coming to their neighborhood. The 700 block of Murray Street, we're doing new housing. The 4x4 has several $1,000,000 just on 4 streets: Elmore, Emily, Ravenwood, and Lindale. We're doing the first supermarket in decades, in years, coming right there at Central and Orleans. A $7+ million park, Nathaniel J. McFadden Learn and Play Park, coming right adjacent to the supermarket. So we're doing a number of different things inside of it. But my job as the senator is to be able to have the roadmap for communities, and not some communities, but all communities, that make sure that they're moving in some level of unison and making sure that they're getting some of their tax dollars that's coming back, that they can visibly see, that they can visibly speak to, and be able to say, this was done in this respective year, and I feel as though I've been heard.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned housing as an issue. And, I serve on Governor Westmore's Youth Advisory Council as his chair of community initiatives, where I get to represent the nearly 1.4 million youth all across Maryland. And a topic that comes up a lot in my home county, in across the other counties that I've visited, the other 22 counties, is housing, right? Mm-hmm. Certain communities have experienced historic redlining, and a lot of the socioeconomic effects are still pervasive and everywhere in the community. And so a big issue that I really try to highlight with youth and with, policymakers and public servants like yourself is how can we foresee meaningful impact in an area like Baltimore before we actually take action? How can we involve the youth in this discussion, in this decision making? And so I was wondering, for you, Senator McCray, what are the policy areas where you believe youth can give the most input and youth input is needed the most in Baltimore?
First, I want to say thank you for your service on the Youth Advisory Council. I had Darius Craig, was one of the appointees at one point in time that served on it for my district. I want to say youth can be involved and engaged in all pieces of policies. I'm going to reemphasize that I talked to you about driver's ed, but like inside of the capital budget this year that we're here right now, I didn't realize that girls flag football was becoming a big thing. And what happens is we had one of the coaches from Digital Harbor that basically said he would love to do some level of a summer girls flag football league in the city of Baltimore. And I thought that was so cool. So you will see a small appropriation. It's a $70+ billion budget for the state of Maryland. I'm one of 13 members that's on this respective budget and taxation committee. But you'll see a small appropriation for $45,000 to make sure that we can lean in on girls flag football in the city of Baltimore, and making sure that we have opportunities for them to be busy, for them to actually learn. You learn so much from sports. I think about working with boardroom chess. They're going to be having chess tournaments. So we see it in Montgomery County and we see it in Baltimore County. But how can you encourage chess so we're actively working the mind and making sure that our young folks, once again, even if you don't want to play sports, that you have this alternative to be able to lean into. So we're working with boardroom chess. They're also in the budget from this standpoint to make sure that these tournaments are held throughout the east side, northeast Baltimore. But when you ask the question, and I'll go back to it, what can young people be doing? First, I want to say most people know who the mayor and the governor is. They know who the mayor, the county executive is, and they know who the governor is. But get to know who your council member is. Get to know who your member of the House of Delegate is, your senator is, because at the end of the day, one of the opportunities that we give to our young people, even high school students, is just being in the arena. How do you get in the arena? Intern in those respective offices. When they send the application, when they say, hey, I live in your district, or I'm very close proximity to your district, and I just want to make sure that I get the exposure, I get the opportunity to understand what it is that you're doing. Let's say you're not interning. How about shadowing for a day? I've had high school students say, this is my day off. I'm out of school this day. You're in the 90-day legislative session, and I want to better understand what's going on. That's an easy layup that our young people, an actionable item that they can be taking right now. And I'm pretty sure if you called your legislator, they would love to participate.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I think Maryland is very, very active in ensuring that our youth are actively incorporated. I have many, many great friends who work in the legislature, and certain people who live and reside or work in Baltimore City have been champions for things like transportation, which I know has been a pinpoint issue for Baltimore City, which has seen major improvement, but people are nonetheless eager for even more improvement and reform. And from the conversations that I've had, Senator McCray, mobility really stands out. How to get around the city, right? How to save time, how to make sure that our youth get free and public transportation. And so for our young audience, can you give us a door into how you think about transit and the role that you've seen transit play in shaping economic opportunity and mobility for Baltimore?
Yep. So, Mark, I'm gonna talk about what we've done and what we're working on. So, one of the things that I think of, and first, I just want to say my lived experience have me fully understanding transit in the city in the Baltimore region. So, not only did I catch the bus at points in times as early as middle school, but my daughters still had to catch the bus to high school and things of that nature. So, I think about this, and when my daughters was catching the bus, Mark, sometimes that bus wouldn't come at all, or sometimes it would come late. And that's then impacting the education, these millions and billions of dollars that we're investing in the school system that they can't even access simply because we can't, as adults, get transportation right. What have we done about things like that? 2021, I worked on something called the Transportation Safety Investment Act. So in 2021, we passed a bill that was vetoed by Governor Hogan, but we overrode the veto to make sure that we get it done to have us inject $2 billion over a 6-year period into our public transportation system. I'm talking about the bus, I'm talking about the light rail, I'm talking about the maintenance of the subway, maintaining these infrastructures to make sure that they then arrive on time. And like I said, sometimes arrive at all. We just had the transportation secretary come before the executive nominations committee a couple weeks ago. And we held up that respective nomination so that she could understand the importance and the challenges that we have in the Baltimore region around public transportation. From that conversation, we saw a supplemental budget come down last week where Governor Moore has put an extra $20+ million into the Be More bus plan to make sure that the bus station is built out, but we're thinking about the future and front loading the future of transportation in the city of Baltimore. Let me be clear, that's not enough. And we have so much more work to do, but I do appreciate the level of partnership and understanding the seriousness of the issues that are happening in the Baltimore region.
Yeah, and in my home county, I live in Howard County. Issues like transportation are always centric to making the city more affordable, and I think that's why a lot of energy and time is put into it. But of course, you can only introduce so many bills in legislative session, one year at a time, one session at a time. And so I think that if we continue to push for transportation, and if we continue to make sure that our youth, our young people are actively informed about how they can participate, which you outlined, very well earlier, it is another important step into making sure that our future is really obtainable. And so staying focused on the sphere of young people, something that really stands out to me about your story, Senator McCray, is your entry point into public service. Like you mentioned, didn't even begin in politics. You didn't set foot in the state house before you decided to run, or you didn't set foot in the state house at all. And so it began with skill. It began with a trade, right? It began with your work as an electrician and a community around that work that was able to be built. And one of the themes that we talk about on this podcast is youth civic participation, sort of being our main priority, and how to level the playing field for kids from socioeconomically disadvantaged and or marginalized backgrounds. And so when you look at people growing up that are young in Baltimore today, I know you just hosted your second annual literacy event. Where do you think the spaces of leadership are actually forming, whether they be schools, whether they be workplaces, churches, community groups, which areas in the community have you seen youth leadership begin, and where can we expand?
Yep. So you hit a couple things, and I just want to emphasize to my young people how important just being engaged is. Mark, if I could be honest and if I could be vulnerable, I want to say that my attitude towards politics was they leave me alone, I leave them alone. So if you look in the voter file or you look in the van file, you'll see that Cory McCray never really engaged in politics until his mid to late 20s. And I started to understand and question, why did Cory McCray get across the finish line? And why didn't I see so many of my peers and my friends that I grew up with? And I think that there are a couple of ways that you shift trajectory in our neighborhoods. One of them is by teaching our folks about financial literacy, but the second one is removing arbitrary barriers baked in public policy. And I feel like we've done a great bit of that. But you have to be engaged, Mark. I always tell folks that if you're not sitting at the table, then you're on the menu. Because so many people are disengaged, they're not sitting at the table, which then the table then isn't diverse. And what happens is people have their own self-interest, or their interests are represented, but not in totality from that standpoint. So please engage. I found myself thinking about, like, why in my neighborhoods, why is it vacancy so high? Why is there high concentration of liquor stores? Why aren't there so many supermarkets? Why don't we have high home ownership in some neighborhoods? Why do some of the school buildings look the way they do? And these decisions are made at the local, the state, and the federal level of why our neighborhoods do at that time. I get it. People are apathetic. I was once apathetic. So that's why I engage. I tell folks you cannot sit on the sidelines at these moments, but I engage because if you do not see the level of leadership that you believe should be demonstrated, then I think it's incumbent, it is important that you then show people what do it look like. So my first priority is making sure that customer service. I think that when you call my office, you email my office, you deserve a response. And not only do you deserve a response, but you deserve a response in a respectable time frame. I try to respond back to folks in a couple hours, but nothing is sitting on my desk for longer than 24 hours sent by a constituent. What then happens is that transcends where this person says somebody care. I don't know if everybody care, but somebody do care about my quality of life issues. And that's really what they want addressed. And hopefully through that one action, they can then believe in the system and then start participating in the system. But I would say back to my young people, it's important for you to be engaged. I've known my wife, Demetria, since I was 17 years of age. Mark, as soon as she turned 18, she participated in the process. I encourage folks to move in that direction, but not only move in that direction and being this voluntary participant, being a engaged participant. Like I said, know who your council members are. Know who your senator is. Know who your delegate is. If you are still in high school, ask them, can you shadow them? Ask them, can you intern in their office? Ask them, can you volunteer in different capacities on there? Because what happens is the best teacher is experience. The more exposure, the more experience, the higher your growth level is going to be going, simply by being around the adults that can move and press that needle.
Yeah. Yeah. And mentorship is such a powerful tool. A lot of youth don't have the opportunity to be mentored, but speaking from personal experience as well to our younger listeners, absolutely go search for that mentorship. And I think there's this fear that our public policy, our public servants don't have time for you, but it is their job to make sure that they are there for you, and to make sure that they pass the baton on to you. If you were to be interested in stepping into civic leadership and public leadership. And so that's what I think a lot of our youth have yet to be able to better understand, simply because they don't have access to conversations like this one. But, absolutely reach out to your local elected officials. And your path, Senator McCray, I think demonstrates the power of mentorship. Leadership is often derived from how we learned, how we watched and observed our leaders to lead. So looking back, I'm really curious, were there any moments or any specific person, you mentioned your mother, that guided you through your journey, or mishaps, or during the times when you made mistakes, that really shaped how you lead now as a public servant?
Yeah. So back to your original question, and then I'm gonna move to this one because I want to make sure that I'm not doing the elected official thing. I want to answer your questions and be very direct. The schoolhouse is one of the places that I think that young people can step up and make sure that they garner those opportunities from a leadership standpoint. But when I think about the people in my life, and I have an abundance of mentorship. When I think about Joe Haskins, who is now the chairman, but was the CEO of Harbor Bank. When I think about Theo Rogers, Michael Cryer, Tony Draper, the CEO of the Afro-American newspaper, I have an abundance of mentors at this moment. And what happens is, Mark, this is so important for my young people. I pray that they hear me on this. What happens is when your circle is so limited, you're then counting on those adults with these limited experiences to give you the best guidance and mentorship possible. So when you think about people that impacted my life, my brother, my mother, so many people in my neighborhood, but what happens is the gap between what I know now and what they know is so large simply because of our lived experience, what I've been able to experience over time. So I tell my young people, take the advice of the folks, and the smart people figure out how not to make the same mistake multiple times. The wise people figure out how to not make the mistake at all because they've learned from others' mistakes. And then recognize that not only does energy, but growth compound. So if you make good choices now, those good choices just keep on compounding. What happens is as you move in your circle, and then you start to be the sharpest person in your circle, you start to then get into other circles. I'll give you an example, one that you gave me, the Youth Advisory Commission. When you think about that, that's opening you up to different opportunities, different people. And what happens is these relationships you're going to carry forward, and you'll have people that you're also going to be able to call on, but you're growing. And that's what they have to be able to do. Walk towards the things that make you feel uncomfortable. If you do not feel uncomfortable in a situation, you are not growing at the capacity that you can grow in. Do not feel like, hey, I'm sustaining, I'm okay, or I'm the best in my field at this moment. Continuous to walk in these different spaces. And what happens then is the people that you wanted to identify, the people that you're seeking out is going to be coming to you. And what happens is these folks that are well established, they're well developed in their careers, they're looking for people like you, Mark. They're not looking to talk to everyone. They're looking to the folks that's going to maximize their time and make sure that they're hearing them out so they're not repeating themselves over and over and over again, but to make you sharper.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, Maryland does a great, great job. Not every governor has an advisory council, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not every senator or delegate offers, sponsorships. And also the Senate, the House Page program in Maryland, it's a great program for our youth. And I think that if we can continue to do that in other sectors, that doesn't necessarily have to be in government, but still civically related, whether that be in the field of journalism, right? How we tell our stories. Knowing how to tell your story effectively is very, very important. And so, Senator, as we wrap up,
can I lean in on the Page program? Because I don't want anybody to walk away thinking, what were they talking about with the Page program? This is an opportunity for seniors that are in high school across the state of Maryland to be able to engage with their state legislature. These young people spend 2 weeks with us, 1 week, and then they come back another week where they're not only paid, but they're also paid for their housing. My daughter participated this past year. So last session she participated, Kennedy did. And this year I had one of my friend's daughter who was skeptical. She was like, she's in a dance program and she didn't want to miss any time for dance. And her dad kept saying, Kennedy kept saying that it was a great opportunity, that you should do it. She ended up doing it. Jazz ended up doing it, and she loves it. She's about to enter into her second week. But if you are a junior and about to enter your senior year, please Google this program. If you are a sophomore about to enter into and one day will be a senior, please, because this is what this conversation has been about: exposure, experience, meeting new people, leveraging your relationship capital, and it's a phenomenal experience for our young people. I hope you'll Google the Maryland General Assembly's Page program.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally have a lot of, people who've told me how great of a program that is, and how tangible and hands-on it is, right? And I think that's a very, very unique experience. And so for a time now, from DC to Annapolis, to our local governments, county councils, board of eds, a lot of young people growing up in places like Baltimore feel as if civic change and reform are very far away, despite having these opportunities like the PAGE program, like internships. They still feel like their lived experiences fueling change is not yet a reality that is ready to be seen through. And even more so, you know, why should my experience be valued if I don't even have the confidence to communicate it, right? To deliver into inclusive policy in the state legislature or even in Congress. And so a large proportion of our listeners, just for your context, are high school students. They are college students, and our other youth organizations that have mentioned that they have a lot of, you know, members who listen to this podcast because we get to have, you know, guests like yourself that tell us about new experiences, your experience and perspectives, and how we can grow as young people. And so my final question to you, or not really a question, but prompt to you, Senator McCray, is what is your message to young people all across the state of Maryland when they are so overcome by cynicism and a disconnect, right? In this time of, again, a great partisan divide that we can see in Congress, and that can trickle down into our state legislatures. But what is your message to them about why civic participation is crucial and whether or not they really have a seat at the table when it comes to making decisions that will affect their daily lives all the way up until they're adults?
Mark, that's a great way to end the segment. It's a beautiful question. The thing that I would say to my younger self, if I got the opportunity to talk to the 16 to 18 to 20-year-old Cory, once again, I would say, do the things that bring joy to your heart. I think that unfortunately I was chasing money when I was that age at that point in time. But what happens is if you're doing things that are going to help other people and you're doing things that bring joy to your heart, then what you're going to find is that all those other things are going to come. The second thing that I would definitely say to them is just be very protective of your time, be very protective of your peace, and be very protective of just, like your space. Mark, I say this. I do not spend my time around everyone. I spend my time around people that's helping me grow. I spend my time in spaces that's helping me grow, and it helps me make better choices. And like I said, those choices then compound. So be very intentional and know that everybody's not worthy of your time. Know that there is a value on your time and how you spend your time. So I would just say, please walk towards the spaces that make you uncomfortable. More importantly, spend time around the people that are going to help you stretch those muscles, get the opportunities to be able to grow, but also do the things that bring joy to your heart. Because when you bless others, what you find is that you get your blessings tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah. Senator McCray, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and for sharing your perspectives. I think your journey will resonate with a lot of our listeners and with their stories and ambitions to make change.
Yes, sir. You have a blessed day, Mark.